February of 1942, folks in Ames were still talking about the New Year's Day blizzard that dumped 24 inches of snow in 24 hours. A photographer from Life magazine happened to be snowed in town, and later in January there was a whole spread in Life magazine about the snow here. Folks were listening to Glenn Miller and his orchestra on the radio and watching newsreels of war updates at the movies. The U.S. was just 2 months into our involvement in World War II after Pearl Harbor was bombed by the Japanese on December 7th of 41. In January of 42, President Roosevelt approved the creation of an atomic bomb project. And particle physicist and Nobel laureate Arthur Compton created the metallurgical laboratory at the University of Chicago, the MET Lab. He reached out to Frank Spedding, head of the physical chemistry department at Iowa State, then college. Spedding Hall, had a special interest in rare earth minerals. So Spedding took the train to Chicago and was tasked with working on the refinement of uranium for a top secret project. Back in 1937, Albert Einstein had written a letter to President Roosevelt alerting him that the Germans were likely working on a nuclear bomb. It wasn't until June of 1942 that the Army Corps of Engineers Manhattan District was formally established, ever after to be known as the Manhattan Project. But Spedding was there at the very beginning, and he came back to Ames and he recruited Harley Wilhelm Hall, an assistant professor in physical chemistry, to lead up the Ames team. In February of 42, Wilhelm, an Iowa farm boy from Elston, a basketball star and graduate of Drake University, eagerly agreed and signed the declaration of secrecy that was required by law. He wouldn't be able to tell his family or friends, neighbors, other colleagues, even his wife, about his work or anything about the project. In the department, they referred to the work as tube alloys, after the British code name for their atomic research. Everyone wanted to help the war effort. Local boys had shipped off to serve. Over the course of the war, some 276,000 Iowans served in the U.S. Armed Forces, and 8,400 of them died. In 1942, the war in Europe was going badly for the Allies. The Germans had advanced into the Soviet Union, which was an ally of the U.S. And in the Pacific, the Japanese were advancing into Southeast Asia. It was a fierce and ugly battle on many fronts. Fear of a world takeover by the Nazis was real, and propaganda was rampant. Dangerous anti-Japanese bigotry led to the internment of over 120,000 Japanese Americans, most of whom were U.S. citizens. While there may have been some good Germans in the U.S., anti-German propaganda was much more prevalent during World War I. It was accepted as public policy that there were no good Japanese. In a propaganda film produced by the U.S. Office of War Information, all Japanese people in the U.S., citizens and aliens alike, were linked to sabotage and espionage, and their internment was justified to limit the perceived security threat. Executive Order 9066 was signed in February of 1942 by President Roosevelt. As the Manhattan Project got underway, soon-to-be General Leslie Groves, the man responsible for building the Pentagon, hired University of Berkeley theoretical physicist J. Robert Oppenheimer to lead the team. If you've read American Prometheus or seen Oppenheimer, the movie it inspired, you know that the problem of refining the necessary amounts of uranium to the purity required to build a bomb was a significant hurdle. Do you remember the scene at Los Alamos with these two glass bowls on the desk? How many of you saw the film Oppenheimer? There were these two glass bowls on the desk, and they represented the amounts of uranium, the larger bowl, and plutonium, the smaller bowl, which is a byproduct of uranium-fueled reactors, that are required for the gadgets, as they call the prospective bombs. During this fraught and heady time of research, the characters drop marbles into the glass bowls to indicate how slow the process of refinement is coming along. But soon they really started to fill up. It's not mentioned in the film, but what happened was the Ames process. Wilhelm and his team, through long and painstaking trial and error research, created a process to reduce uranium tetrafluoride with magnesium to obtain molten uranium metal. The Ames laboratory provided over 30% of the uranium used in Chicago Pile 1, the world's first nuclear reactor. The Ames process, still in use today, was quickly scaled up for use in the Manhattan Project. Here's the Ames team. Wilhelm is on the far left, and Spedding is in the dark suit, third from the right. Thousands of scientists were working around the country to create the atomic bomb, or their own little process of it. There were very few people who knew how the whole process was created. They were really, they were kept, what's the word I'm looking for? Siloed, thank you. I wrote this, but that word wasn't there. Thousands of scientists were working around the country, and they believed that the atomic bomb was necessary to end the war. Germany surrendered in May of 1945. In July of 45, the Los Alamos team had enough plutonium for the Trinity test to find out if this weapon to end all war would work. Oppenheimer said, "We are theorists. Yes, we imagine a future, and our imaginings horrify us. But they won't fear it unless they understand it, and they won't understand it unless we've used it. And when the world learns the terrible secret of Los Alamos, our work here will ensure a peace mankind has never seen." This was what they believed. General Groves wanted it in time for the Potsdam Conference, where U.S. President, now Truman, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, and Soviet Premier Joseph Stalin would meet to discuss the next phase of the war in the Pacific. And as the scientists hoped, they would have had the Trinity test, and it would demonstrate to these world leaders what was possible so they wouldn't have to use it. They knew its potential, and they knew that the U.S. military wanted to use it on civilians in Japan. Something was moving faster than the scientists' ability to stop it. Here's the Los Alamos team leaders with Oppenheimer in his familiar pork pie hat. Trinity happened, but it barely got a mention at Potsdam. And we know how the next part of the story ends. On August 6th and 9th, this week, we will observe the 80th anniversary of the use of the atomic bombs on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The immediate deaths of 110,000 people, and another 60,000 dead by the end of the year from burns and radiation sickness. That's 170,000 people dead in 1 year and the subsequent years held sickness and death for hundreds of thousands more. This week, on August 6th and August 9th, I invite you to place some ice in a bowl. Maybe a bowl that's special to you. Maybe a bowl that's been in your family for a while if you have it. And allow that ice to melt as we remember what was wrought, the people who lived and the people who died. And when it's melted, and when you've given a blessing over it, take it outside and return it to the earth. When I first saw Oppenheimer, I was really turned off by it, including what I still think of as some gratuitous nudity. No prude me, but come on. Well, it does a good job of telling the story of the man and his efforts after the war to mitigate the use of nuclear weapons by means of international cooperation. There is almost nothing in the film that humanizes the Japanese, that tells the awful story of destruction and loss of life. So in preparation for this week, I've spent my summer with a little bit of death and destruction. I read the book and watched the film a couple more times, and I understand it better now. And I'm in sympathy with these young scientists who were funded and free to follow the intellectual implications of nuclear fission, who believed that they were beating back the threat of totalitarianism for the entire world, and who also questioned the moral and ethical implications. After the death of Hitler, Lily Hornig, who was one of the few female scientists working at Los Alamos, said, "It's no longer the enemy who are the greatest threat to mankind. It's our work." As a person who is married into science, you know, a person might be married into Catholicism. I'm married into science. Who reveres the scientific method and who believes that our lives are made immeasurably better because of science, and who wants to believe that these scientists were ethical and earnest. I do believe they were ethical and earnest still. I struggle with their impotence to stop the contagion of a nuclear arms race once the beast itself was unleashed. How do I make sense of this? How do I find sympathy or something like compassion for the military men who were doing what they were trained to do, who would not be deterred from using the bomb, even after Germany had surrendered? And as by many people's estimation, Japan was on the verge of capitulation. General Groves himself said that the first bomb was dropped to show that we could, and the second bomb was dropped to show that we could keep on doing it. Some historians believe that the bombing of Nagasaki was to show Joe Stalin that he had better not come for Japan or for us. These performances of military might when the war was near an end can be considered war crimes, as defined by the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, because the targets were specifically civilian. So what are we to think? All right, you two. It's a lot. It's a lot to hold. So what are we to think and feel here in Ames in early August of 2025, so far removed in all but geographic proximity to the intellectual fervor to save the world? To be clear, the Unitarian was then the Unitarian Fellowship of Ames, later Unitarian Universalist. This fellowship was gathered in 1946 after the end of the war, after the Ames project had moved into something else, the Ames National Laboratory. And we don't know that any of the people who worked there were part of this fellowship. We don't have any evidence that they were, not that they wouldn't have been welcomed here. But something happened here in this town that both helped to save the world and destroy the world at the same time. The potential to destroy the world. And all of us ever after live in the atomic age. This is the essence of theological complexity, of struggling with meaning making, of building our capacity for discomfort and perhaps disagreement, of living in the questions rather than settling on one right answer. Oh, that's hard. And what are the parallels that we might draw today when the world is burning? When fear of authoritarianism is rampant and when propaganda is rampant and authoritarianism is real. When scientific research is defunded and the results are disregarded if they don't meet the authoritarian agenda, how do we wrestle honestly with ethics and the morality of knowing that sometimes science, or really any endeavor, produces results that can be misused by those in power? Who has the moral compass? As one of you asked me last week, what gives us the right to believe that we have the moral high ground, the ethical advantage? I don't know, but I'm intrigued and drawn by the question. Empathy and compassion are fruits of the spiritual practice of curiosity. Empathy and compassion can be the fruits of the spiritual practice of curiosity. To engage with these questions, to wrestle with complexity, allows us to investigate our own biases, to build our capacity for discomfort, to strengthen our resolve for peace for all the world. And I wonder if I'm the only one asking myself if calls for peace, for healing, for nonviolence feel anemic as we strive to meet this moment. You've been working on peace your whole lives. Anybody who knows the word to Pete Seeger's "Where Have All the Flowers Gone?" have been working toward believing in the possibility of peace for our whole lives. But perhaps I misunderstand the incredible strength and power required for peace, for healing, for internal and community practices that make us agents of peace. I want to learn more about this discipline of Gandhi, of King, of the anti-nuclear weapons activists in the 70s and 80s. And we'll talk more about this next week, and especially learn more about Sachiko's inspiring life and story after the bombing of Nagasaki. In a moment, we'll watch and sing along with a video by hip-hop artist Luaya of the Peace Poets. Luaya is a poet and a journalist and an organizer with a focus on health and healing. And he performs inside prisons and hospitals, on rallies and in the streets, and works with communities for collective healing and liberation around the world. Singing together, singing loudly together helps me feel our power and our resilience. In the summer of 2025, folks in Ames were talking about the rainiest July on record. We gathered at Bandshell Park for municipal band concerts, streamed movies, and read the news on our devices. Some of us heard and believed the propaganda about undocumented immigrants, and some of us wondered who benefited from such disinformation. Some of us practiced sitting in discomfort at our local film series about racism and resilience, and wondered aloud with each other, what could we do? What would we do How can we be together in a different way, and what difference will we collectively make in the world? Let us go forth. May it be so, and blessed be.